Good day, good day. This is Redhawk, and I'm coming to you from the deep end. I'm here in Spokane, Washington. My cohort, Mary Ann, is coming to you from Spokane Valley, and Bob Hays all the way from Hurricane Land in Florida. So, I hope all is well. You know, last night, my wife Edie and I, we had friends over for dinner, and we really loved doing that kind of thing. And it was a delight. We had drinks and an appetizer. I made a seafood linguine in a lobster sauce, and we just sat around and we shared stories, our personal stories. We laughed and reveled in each other's stories, and you know, with each telling, with each sharing, we became more connected. Because sharing our stories offers this solidarity, this support. And it seems so natural when we socialize to share our stories, doesn't it? To invite each other into these parts of our lives that are unseen, if you will, and they get to be seen. So today, we want to invite you all into our lives by sharing some of our personal stories that had a positive impact on our lives. And, you know, through our podcast, we've been sharing bits and pieces of our stories. But this sharing opens us. It opens us not just to healthier and happier lives, because it turns out, if you do the study, sharing our stories does that, but it also opens us to empathy, to understanding, to compassion. You know, it's the stories that illustrate the pieces that are the real lessons of our lives. So I'm going to start out by saying, you know, me and Bob, we've been friends since the insane 70s. Actually, we went to the same high school together. He was a couple years ahead of me. But after I got out of the military, and Bob too, we hooked up with a group of fellow radicals, smoking a lot of cannabis, taking a lot of LSD, experimenting with cocaine and whatever else came our way. And Bob was one of my cohorts back then, as he still is today in this podcast. And we had another in our little group that was central to us, and his name was Jerry Simpson. He's passed on. And he had this idea that he was going to fly out to the West Coast and buy some marijuana. And that's exactly what he did. And he came back with 20 plus pounds of marijuana in suitcases. And they were two kinds. They were red wrapper and blue wrapper. And I don't remember which was which. One was a better grade. And to be honest, compared to today, nobody would smoke that stuff. Bob's giving a thumbs down. And I don't know how, but the wrappers ended up in the back of my van. And one time when I was visiting my family, my mom and dad, my mom decided she was going to clean my van out. And so she found all these huge cellophane wrappers. Each was big enough to go around a key. That's 2.2 pounds of marijuana. And she said, what were those things that were in the back? And I just told her, you know, I was kind of honest. I was actually trying to get her to smoke some, but she wouldn't. And I just told her what they were. And she was concerned. And she saw this part of my life that she was concerned in. And, you know, Bob, I want you to know she never said Bob's a bad influence. She knew that I was probably the one that was the bad influence on the rest of you all. But anyway, she went to a psychiatrist, right? And, you know, she's telling the psychiatrist what's happening. And there was this thing that was emerging called tough love. And the psychiatrist says, you need to change all your locks, lock him out, and practice tough love. And my mom, she said, I got up and I went to the wall and I looked at his degrees. He was a psychiatrist. He had an MD. And she said, you might know a lot about the mind, but I'm not sure you know a whole lot about love. And she came home, talked to my dad, and they called me in my apartment. I think there were 8 or 9 of us there because we had a group there all the time. We were just smoking a lot of cannabis. And she said, how many are there? And I said, there's 8 of us here. She said, in an hour, everybody come over and we'll feed you. So it's like, far out. Everybody was excited. So we go over to my parents' house. We're not in the kitchen. We're at the dining room table. They put a leaf in the dining room table. They put their best china on, Waterford crystal, and their real silverware. And then they waited on us like we were royalty. And I don't remember what we had. It was probably spaghetti or roast beef or something. I can't remember. But they fed us a great meal. And every 2 weeks, my mom would call up and go, how many people are there? And we would tell her, and she said, in an hour, come over. No judgment, just service. And sometimes I wonder how these dinners affected me and whether they contributed to my becoming a minister. There's something about her response and their response that opened me. And it's a story that lives in me, and I still have some beef with my parents. I think anybody who does it is probably not real. But this was a part of them that showed me something that all humans are capable of. And I hope I've been up to the task of what they taught me there. So that's my story for now. I'm sure in our conversation some other things will pop up. But Bob, what's the story you want to share?
Well, this has been an interesting exercise for me because, I'm going over your life at this stage of my life is a real trip because, so much has occurred. So many people, so many influences. I mean, I could talk about various college professors that I had that really had an influence on me. I could talk about some of the incredible friends that I've had over the years, you being one of them, Redhawk, more recently Mary Ann. But, people like Stephen Hickman, the artist, that had a huge influence on me because I would spend time with him just sitting and BSing as he would draw. And we would spend 5-6 hours sometimes just sitting at his parents' kitchen table while he drew. And we just talked about everything from opening a delicatessen on Mars to whatever. But the more I thought about it, the more I had to come back to my wife, Gretchen. Because at the time I met Gretchen, I was already on this quest that we're still on today and trying to ask and search for answers to the questions that we find at the deep end. But as our longtime listeners may already know, I'm a very intellectual type guy, very abstract. I do a lot of thinking. I do a lot of analyzing. And I kind of was existing in that world and just doing enough in the concrete world to get by. And I didn't care if I was sleeping on the floor somewhere. I didn't care if there was 10 people living in a 2-bedroom apartment. I didn't care if we'd move out to the countryside or whatever. I was still on this same quest, but this very intellectual, abstract way of doing it. But when I met and fell in love with my wife, Gretchen, she brought to me the need to become more concrete in my life. It wasn't just me anymore on this intellectual quest. It was me and her and a future family that I had to somehow provide for. And if that hadn't happened, I would probably be on in an ashram somewhere or on a kibbutz or something. But instead, I had to buckle down, go back to school, learn the kind of things I would be able to build a career on, have a career, raise a family, and I'm lucky enough now that this month we're going to be celebrating our 52nd anniversary. And it's all due to her that I was able to lead 2 lives, a concrete, responsible life and an abstract, intellectual life. And that's really been my whole trajectory. And if it wasn't for her, I don't know that I would be able to be as balanced, if you will, as I've been able to have my life. And I thank the powers that be every day.
Amen. Yeah, our spousal things, that's a trippy thing. Marianne?
Well, I've been thinking about this all week because, when I was younger, I had a sense of adventure from a very early age, and also an adversity to structure and tradition. And my friend and I jumped in a car and just took off across the United States with no plan, no idea where we were going, except we were heading to California. We were going from Ohio to California. And
what year was that, Marianne?
That was in probably 1977, 78.
All right.
Yeah. And it was just an adventure. We were going to just have a good time, and it took us 3 months to get to California, and we had enough money to either put down first and last on an apartment or have a great time going all the way back home. And then we ended up staying. And so it was just kind of like, I never worried about tomorrow. I never worried about what was coming next. I was just doing the next thing. And then, as most people know, my life took these weird, crazy tumbles with a lot of illnesses in my family. And, when my husband and my daughter were going through cancer treatments, and I was working full time also. So I was working full time because I was the only income for our family. I also carried our health insurance. I had 2 young boys and 2 sick family members. And so I was dividing my time between hospitals and medical home care and maintaining the house and caring for the kids. And I can tell you that it was the kindness of friends and family members and perfect strangers that completely changed the way I see the world, because so many people stepped up to take care of us. We had meal trains. People would deliver full meals to our house with words of encouragement. And just help just poured into our lives. And to be really honest here, it was just as difficult, and this is going to sound really weird, but it was just as difficult to accept that help as it was to be going through what we were going through, because it was extremely humbling, extremely. I had the belief that if you needed help, you were failing. And so, I believe that we're responsible for our lives and our own choices. So I had to break that down and accept help. And then after, Carrie and Nikki passed, I moved to Spokane, and 3 years later, Michael was diagnosed, and it happened again. And each time, my worldview changed. The way I saw the world changed. So, when Michael was sick, I'd come home to a freshly mowed grass. And just this touching these kids, these kindnesses that were given to us it was amazing. And so, and then after Michael passed, I got involved in the nonprofit world. So I was introduced to a whole other level of connection. And the Childhood Cancer Coalition, I worked there for 10 years, building this support for families who were going through cancer treatments. And, my view of humanity I was seeing such generosity every single day. My view of humanity was goodness and promise, hope and optimism, even when my circumstances, personal circumstances, were sorrowful and devastating. And I'm not naive to the sorrow. I see it. I see lots of families suffering with ill children. I know how hard that is. I see the senseless shooting of innocent people, and the illusions that some of our leaders have of superiority over others. I know that the world is not all rainbows and unicorns. Even driving down the street, somebody flips you off, or being mean to your servers. But through all of these experiences that I've had that have led me here today, I see the opposite too. Shared connections. That there are people that use their power and influence to help and advance the collective good, and that's where our choices are, I think.
Yeah.
And when somebody showed up at my door with a meal, my burden was lifted. But what I also know is their burden was lifted as well. And I experienced that in my own work, because it's that sharing and connection that really matters.
Yeah.
And so, it's led me to, I'm still living without a plan. And what's next? So that's kind of where I got shaped. Amen. Along the way.
And I'm going to pick up, use your still don't have a plan. You guys went more expansive in your stories. I've never had a plan. I have a lot of people now who are, they're reaping the rewards of their plans. And, I had Social Security and a retirement account. Those just happened. I didn't plan on them. When we bought our house, we were renting, and someone said, well, you got GI Bill. And I went, oh yeah, I should try that. So every step, it was kind of like, even going to divinity school, I went to divinity school just because I was wondering about stuff. And I was thinking, Joseph Campbell was at Chicago Divinity School, and I'm going, maybe I need to go to school to see what I can do. So my problem has been, and I love the community piece that you brought in, Mary Ann, because I think that is huge. For me, church has been a disillusionment for me. I looked for even the smallest bit of greatness in my local church, and it was very, very difficult to see. I saw a lot of pettiness. The conclusion I came to, and I've said this in previous podcasts, is most people go to church for two things: comfort and justification. And that's disheartening for me. My problem also is I'm very critical. I have an internal attorney general who's indicting all the time because there's so much injustice in the world. It drives me crazy. Literally drives me crazy. The first time I saw this in myself, because I was a racist, Confederate kind of person, was at church in the 60s when the minister said, if anybody would have a problem with a Negro coming into our church and sitting next to you to worship God with us, then you need to get up and leave now, and I'll give you a minute to do that. And I was in the balcony, and we quit wrestling up there for a minute because the church got so quiet. Nobody got up to leave. That moment showed me the impact that the church could have, a greatness. And I got to know our minister, Cliff Johnson. My mom sent my brother and I to him because she caught us drinking. And basically he said, I caught my son drinking. And I asked him why. And he said, we're just having fun. So I gave him his fake ID back. And we said, why did you give him your his fake ID back? And he said, well, if he was drinking because he had to, I wouldn't have. But, experimenting. And the minister just said, be very careful. It's dangerous. The kinds of things that impacted me to become a minister were questions. I mean, Bob, you and I reading Teilhard de Chardin together, The Phenomenon of Man, that was a life changer for me. And the places I've worked, Hope, Magic Carpet. I worked for the courts. I worked for mental hospitals. I've gotten to see a whole lot. By the way, one of my favorite mental hospital stories is I was preaching, and I'm the only person I know where women ripped their clothes off while they were preaching. It was in a Down syndrome ward, and I still remember I was preaching on, coming like a thief in the night, and these women just started ripping their clothes off. And of course, I just kept preaching, and afterwards, I asked the nurse. I said, "Well, how often do they do that?" And they said a few times a day. And I said, "Well, why don't you just let them run around naked?" And the nurse looked at me and she said, "Because they're human." You see those little moments that seem to rear their head and speak the whole universe. And Marianne, you said it very well. You're Catholic. How you got that Calvinistic, I can do it all by myself and I have to be productive. I don't know where you got that from. I was brought up as a Calvinist. But my dad, so the way our stories inform us and the way our sharing them not just informs other people, but lets them in, I think those are very, very, it's important to be with people that you can share your stories with. And last night, the couple we had over, they're younger than us, but Landon and I, there's no way we have a conversation where it doesn't eventually move to blowing shit up. Because we both agree you just can't blow shit up anymore. You get in trouble. Our stories, our personal stories, and if our listener gets anything out of this, be open to sharing your stories. Look at your stories and see where this truth, this Dharma piece, rears its head and helps shape us into a better person, a more expanded person. And Bob, when you talk about Gretchen, I mean, amen, brother. I could bring Edie into this, who's about as different from me as you can think. She's a Virgo and I'm a Pisces, so we're at two different ends. And those stories are just important. And I'll be honest, friends, I can't imagine a life without friends.
No. Well, and I think too that there are people that come in and out of our lives too at different points, and that have lasting impacts. When my friend and I were getting ready to leave Ohio, I had an office job. I was working at the county courthouse, and one of the older gentlemen that worked in the office was so horrified that we would get in a car, just two young girls, and take off across the country. That how dangerous that was. And this was, like I said, this was back in the summer. There were people still hitchhiking back then, right? And and that comment that he made still sticks with me, because it was just like, well, what are you talking about? What will be, will be. We're going to go and we're going to have a good time. And it wasn't, like I said, it's not that I don't know that bad things happen, that they don't exist, but it was this quest to live my life without being afraid of everything.
Amen.
And that's something that I'm finding has crept back into my life. That just, I was selling a car and putting that out to strangers, and do I give them my home address to come and look at my car? And it's just like how that kind of creeps back in, and it's like, what's wrong with us? We're afraid of everything. And so just fighting against that. And these people that that had impact, that I don't even remember their name, but they came into my life and touched a moment that still lives with me. And I think we have those encounters all the time.
Yeah.
And you're right, it's our stories. Our stories are, they're what connects us.
They are what connects us. And
Well, the Castaneda books had a big influence on my life, and his perhaps fictional, perhaps real character Don Juan would talk about how you would encounter allies in your life, and he would have exercises with Castaneda where he would sit and have him look out at different people in the town square and say, now who's an ally, who's an enemy, and it's absolutely correct what you were just saying. People can come into your life if only for a couple of days, and you look back at it and you think, wow, that was an ally. That person did something for me that no one else could have done at that time, and it's had such an influence down through the years. Even if you don't think about it every day, if you really trace things back, you can go, oh yeah, that guy there, I partied at his apartment for a week, and wow, what a time we had, and what we talked about, and what we thought, and how it set a direction for me. And there's, I don't know, dozens, if I really thought about it, of allies that I've had, not just longtime friends like Redhawk, but people who I may have only known for a couple of days.
yeah.
People used to come through our apartment.
Yeah, I was just thinking Yancey, his motor blew up. Was that his name, Yancey?
Sailor.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he stayed with us for 3 days or something like that.
And then we put a new motor in his thing, and he was completely blown away that we did that. But we had disposable income. And we're coming to the end of our time. Marianne, final comments?
Well, I love that, the allies, because I've heard them referred to as mighty companions, and yes, they, it shapes who you are in going forward, because there's something there, and I had those encounters that lasted maybe an hour, not even a couple of days, that I still can remember those. So I think that sharing our personal stories with each other is a way for us to open up and connect. And I just heard a beautiful, powerful story just about how that it's the connections that we make. That's the only thing that stays with us when we leave this planet. And they're important. And the only way to make those connections is through our stories.
Amen.
So.
Bob, final comments?
Oh gosh, I don't know. Life is so strange, so unpredictable, so exciting yet difficult. It's and all of these different encounters are important knots in the tapestry of our life. And it's part of being human, I think, to have these connections and to share these different perspectives on our unique paths that we're each taking, and that crisscross each other's. And if we're lucky, when those paths cross, we can find allies there. Yeah. And that can be very, very important the direction and the really the beauty of our lives.
Amen. Amen. Isn't that the truth? And, you know, I asked an old Native American woman one time, I was in my what is reality phase. I couldn't sit next to somebody on a bus or an airplane and not ask them what was reality. And usually I had little earth marbles I would give folks when I asked them that. And I asked this old Native American woman, so what is reality? And she looked at me in her eyes was amazing. She said, reality is this great touching. We are inside it. This is where we have to touch, where we have to connect, if you will. She didn't use that word. She basically left it at it's a great touching. And I think what you all are talking about is exactly that. That these stories are a way for us to touch each other, to hear each other, to embody each other in some amazing ways. And speaking of amazing ways, next podcast, we're going to go and talk about evolution's greatest tool and how it works, not just in nature, but in our lives. And what is that tool? It's the mistake. The mistake. I don't know about you, but when I look at my life and places I've really screwed up, they become, in retrospect, these pivot points where everything changed, where I moved in a new direction. The mistake, my mistakes. You know, something I've learned early is as bad as crow tastes, it's better warm than cold. So, you know, own your shit and move on. Get on with it. The mistake is there to inform you, to create you, to become you in such a way that new creativity might burst out. The mistake. Till then, my friends, blessings. And may your stories be full, and may you find places to tell them. Be well.